The return. The air tasted different. Not the salty, thick air of the sea or the dry desert dust he'd come to know so well, but the sharp, clean scent of pines and fresh-turned earth. Ethan drove his beat-up pickup truck down a familiar road, the asphalt cracked and patched, the guardrails rusted. He hadn't been back to this town, this small corner of America, since he'd joined the Marines almost a decade ago. It was a place frozen in time, and yet something felt off. Houses that once held families he knew were now shuttered, their lawns overgrown. Signs for local businesses were peeling, faded. In their place, he saw new glossy billboards with a stylized black mountain logo and the words, "Blackstone Development. Your future is here." The slogan, to Ethan, felt less like a promise and more like a threat. He pulled into the long gravel driveway of his family's farm, the engine groaning to a halt. His father was sitting on the porch swing, a tired man with hands that told the story of a lifetime spent working the land. His face, usually a roadmap of weathered kindness, was etched with a new kind of worry. "Ethan," his father said, the sound of his name a tired relief. "You're home." They talked, not of Ethan's military service, but of the farm, of the town. His father spoke of the pressure. He spoke of the letters, the phone calls, the unsolicited visits from men in dark suits. He was one of the last holdouts. Blackstone, he explained, was a massive corporation that wanted to buy up all the land for some kind of industrial complex. Everyone else had sold. They offered a fortune, his dad said. But this land, it's not just land. It's our family, our roots. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the fields, Ethan felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The town he knew was gone, replaced by something predatory, something his father was standing alone against. He saw the defiance in his father's eyes, but he also saw the fear. And for the first time since he'd returned, Ethan felt like deal. "Your father is being difficult." He glanced at Ethan's father, a look of pure condescension on his face. "He's not difficult," Ethan countered. "He's a man who values his home, and I'm his son. So I'll say it again. Leave." The man's smile faded. "We have a deadline. The offer expires tomorrow. If he doesn't sign, the price drops. Drastically." He pulled a thick manila envelope from a briefcase. "This is the final offer. It's a generous one." Ethan's father stood up. His shoulders slumped, but his head held high. "I told you, this land isn't for sale. Not for any price." The leader of the group smirked. "That's a shame. It would be a real tragedy if something unexpected were to happen to it. Or to you. A tractor malfunction, perhaps? A bad turn on the main road?" His eyes, devoid of any warmth, lingered on Ethan. A silent, chilling message passing between them. He was no longer talking about the land. Ethan's muscles tensed. He was trained for combat, for direct threats. But this was a different kind of war. This was quiet intimidation, a promise of violence hidden behind polite language. The men turned and got back into their vehicle, the engine idling for a moment before they drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and an icy silence in their wake. As the dust settled, Ethan looked at his father, whose face was pale and drawn. The land, once a symbol of their family's strength, now felt like a target. And Ethan knew, with a bone-deep certainty that this wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The phone call came in the middle of the night. Ethan's world narrowed to the cold ring of the phone and his father's name spoken by an unfamiliar, somber voice. The police officer on the other end of the line was short and to the point. His father's truck had veered off the road and hit a tree on a sharp curve just outside of town. The official report said it was a tragic accident.
"This was an accident," Ethan said, his voice flat. He pointed to the scorch mark. "What's this?" The officer's eyes widened slightly, then he quickly averted his gaze. "That, I'm not sure, sir. The official report says a steering column malfunction." "Then why did the tire blow out?" Ethan pressed. "And why is there a burn mark from a hot wire on the back?" The officer's face turned pale. "Sir, I'm not authorized to speculate. You should head home and get some rest. We'll handle the rest." Ethan looked from the officer back to the truck. He wasn't trained to believe in coincidences, and he saw none here. He saw a cold, calculated act. He saw a warning delivered, a promise fulfilled. The image of the Escalade and the men in suits flashed in his mind. The polite threat, the promise of an accident. This wasn't a tragedy, this was a message. And it was a message he planned to answer. Hess, the vow. The funeral was a quiet affair, a small gathering of weathered faces and hushed voices. The town's pastor spoke of a good man, of faith, and of a life well lived. Ethan stood apart from the crowd, his grief a tight, hard ball in his chest. He didn't feel sadness as much as a cold, simmering rage. Every kind word spoken about his father felt like a mockery of his violent, unjust end. As the last mourners began to leave, a black Escalade, a twin to the one that had pulled up to their farm parked by the roadside. A man in a suit, not one of the three from the other day but clearly their superior, stepped out. He was older, with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. He approached Ethan with a practiced, somber gait. "My sincerest condolences," the man said, his voice smooth and empty. "I'm with Blackstone. We were very sorry to hear about your father." He held out a manila envelope, identical to the last one, and placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. The touch felt like a violation. "This offer, it's still good. I'm sure your father would have wanted you to have a fresh start. You could sell the land, take the money, and leave all this sadness behind you." Ethan looked at the man's hand on his shoulder, then at the envelope. His mind Fury. "Don't make this more difficult than it has to be, son." Ethan didn't respond. He just stood there, over his father's fresh grave, his jaw set in a hard, unbreakable line. He had no plan, no allies, and no evidence that would stand up in court. He had only a vow, made to the man he had just laid to rest. The vow of a son who had come home, not to escape his past, but to avenge it. The first clue. The day after the funeral, Ethan went back to the crash site. The police tape was gone, the skid marks faded, but the memory of the twisted metal and his father's last moments was vivid in his mind. He wasn't looking for a miracle, just for something the cops, or maybe the people who paid them, had missed. He started from where the tire marks began, walking slowly, his eyes scanning the ground. He saw the typical signs of a car losing control: broken branches, torn up grass, and chunks of shattered headlight. But then, he noticed something else, something small and out of place. Tucked into a thicket of thorns was a piece of metal, no bigger than his thumb. It was a shard of a reflective lens, a part of a taillight, but it wasn't from his father's truck. This was from a different vehicle, a newer, more expensive model. He pocketed the shard and kept searching. He knew a car crash didn't just happen. Something, or someone, had caused it. He looked at the deep gouge in the road where his father's truck first left the asphalt. It was too sharp, too deliberate. An idea sparked in his mind, something from his military training. A simple, low-tech way to take out a moving vehicle. That's when he saw it.
Tucked behind a large rock, a half-buried coil of thin, almost invisible steel wire. He pulled it out, and it was attached to a stake hammered deep into the ground. It was an improvised tripwire. The wire had been stretched across the road, low enough to strike a car's tire and high enough to be hidden by the dark. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a trap. Ethan's heart hammered with a grim satisfaction. He finally had something concrete, a physical link to the conspiracy. He wrapped the wire carefully and put it in a separate pocket. He knew this alone wouldn't hold up in court, but it was a start. He had a piece
Of sympathy and unease. He was a good man, Ethan. A real good man. Ethan nodded. I know. Bob, I have to ask you something. Did you see anything that night? Anyone unusual? Or any vehicles that didn't belong? Bob's eyes darted nervously toward the street. Look, Ethan, I didn't see anything. I was closed. You should let the police handle this. Ethan, however, saw the fear in Bob's eyes. He knew he was holding something back. Ethan spoke in a low, firm voice. Bob, they killed my father, and they're not going to stop, not until I make them. Please, if you saw anything at all, it might just be the one thing that helps me get justice. The plea seemed to resonate with Bob. He sighed, looked around to make sure no one was listening, and then leaned in. I didn't see the accident itself, but a few hours before, I saw a black SUV parked by the old oak tree on the hill. It was one of those fancy ones, a newer model. It just sat there for a long time. It felt off. And then, a little later, I saw a couple of guys get out of it. They were holding what looked like a roll of wire. Ethan felt a jolt of recognition. A black SUV, a roll of wire, the same things he had found at the crash site. Bob's story wasn't a coincidence, it was a confirmation. Where did they go? Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. They walked into the field and were there for a few minutes, Bob said, his voice trembling slightly. It just felt wrong. Then they got back in the car and drove away. As Ethan was about to leave, his eyes caught on a small, rusted camera mounted on a pole near the back of the store. It was old, the kind of security camera that probably hadn't been working in a decade. Bob, that camera on the pole, Ethan said, pointing. Is it still working? Bob chuckled weakly. That old thing? Nah, hasn't worked in years. But the hard drive's still in the back room. Ethan's heart raced. He knew the odds were slim, but this was the first genuine alarm. What is this? Sterling asked, gesturing to the glass shard as if it were a dirty rock. It's from a black Escalade, the kind your company uses, Ethan said, his gaze unwavering. Found it at the scene of my father's accident. I believe it's a piece of the vehicle that helped kill him. Sterling scoffed, trying to regain his composure. That's absurd. Our vehicles are brand new. They don't have broken taillights. Maybe not yet, Ethan replied, his eyes narrowing. But they will. You can be sure of that. Sterling's eyes narrowed in return. Your grief is making you irrational. I suggest you take this and you go home. Don't make me call security. Ethan picked up the glass shard and put it back in his pocket. He leaned in close to Sterling, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I'm not here to talk. I'm here to let you know I'm not going anywhere. You tried to scare my father. You killed him. Now you're trying to scare me. It's not going to work, and believe me, the next time I show up, I won't be alone. And I'll have more than just a piece of a taillight. As Ethan turned to leave, Sterling's voice, now raw and venomous, followed him. You don't know who you're messing with, boy. You'll regret this. Ethan paused at the door. I already have one regret, he he said without looking back, "that I wasn't here sooner to protect my father." He stepped out into the sunlight, the cold, sterile air of the Blackstone office left behind. He had made his move, and now they knew he was a threat. The game was no longer being played in the shadows. It was out in the open, and he knew they would be coming for him. The first part of his plan was complete. The next was to find the hard drive from Bob's old camera and get a good look at who had really been on that road the night his father died. The ally, Ethan drove across town to the old industrial park, a place of abandoned warehouses and faded graffiti. He pulled up to a nondescript building and knocked on a steel door. It opened a moment later, revealing a man with a wild shock of red hair and a pair of—
"Drive is old, man. The data is fragmented, corrupted."
Leo mumbled, a focused frown on his face.
"But it's not wiped, just hidden. Looks like someone tried to cover their tracks, but they didn't do a very good job."
For the next 2 hours, the only sound in the room was the hum of the computers and the rapid click of Leo's keyboard. Ethan watched, his hope a fragile thing in the tense silence. Finally, Leo let out a triumphant gasp.
"Got it,"
he said, his voice filled with a giddy excitement.
"I've recovered a few video files. They're grainy, but they're there."
He pulled up a video on a large monitor. The footage was dark and blurry, but it showed the black Escalade Ethan had seen, pulling up to the side of the road. 2 figures got out, their faces obscured by the darkness, and then they walked out of frame. A few minutes later, they returned, and the Escalade drove away. The timestamp on the video confirmed it, a few hours before the accident.
"That's them,"
Ethan said, a cold certainty in his voice.
"That's them, planting the tripwire."
Leo pulled up another video file. This one was even more chilling. It was a close-up, recovered from a different angle, showing the passenger side of the Escalade as it drove away. The taillight was clearly cracked, with a jagged piece missing.
"Looks like a piece of that taillight broke off,"
Leo said, pointing at the screen.
"Right there. The one you have."
Ethan felt a grim satisfaction. He now had the piece of the puzzle and the proof that it belonged to the very people who had killed his father. He was no longer just a son seeking revenge. He was a man with evidence. The game was about to change. He had found an ally, a crucial part of his team, and together, they were ready to take on a fight that no one in town had ever dared to start. Uprising. Ethan and Leo worked through the night, editing the grainy video footage. Leo stabilized the shaky images, zoomed in on key details, and added clear text overlays highlighting the timestamp and the brand of the vehicle. By dawn, they had a short, powerful video montage. It was proof, undeniable and damning. Ethan's funeral home, where Ethan's father had been laid to rest, became a backdrop for interviews and protests. Ethan, once just a lone figure, was now a reluctant leader. He gave an interview to a national news network, his face calm and his voice filled with an unwavering resolve. He didn't talk about revenge, he talked about justice. He didn't just show them the video, he spoke of the moral corruption of a company that would kill a man for his land. He held up the piece of the taillight, a physical testament to Blackstone's crime. Under immense public pressure, the police department, which had so quickly dismissed the case, was forced to act. The state attorney general's office announced an official investigation into Blackstone. The project manager, Mr. Sterling, was seen on the news, his face grim and defeated as he dodged a flurry of questions from reporters. Ethan felt a grim satisfaction. He was no longer fighting a secret war. He had pulled Blackstone into the light, and now they were beginning to burn. The town was no longer a victim, it was a force. The people, once scattered and afraid, had united. They were marching on the streets, holding signs demanding justice. Ethan had not only avenged his father, he had reignited the spirit of his town. The real fight was just beginning, but for the first time, he wasn't fighting it alone. The trap. The call came from Mr. Sterling himself. His voice, usually so calm and superior, now had a frantic edge to it. He invited Ethan to a private meeting at the Blackstone headquarters, offering a deal that would make him a very wealthy man if he would just retract the video and stop cooperating with the media. Ethan knew it was a trap. He wasn't a fool. He was a Marine trained to read people and situations. He agreed to the meeting, but he had a plan of his own. He secretly equipped himself with a tiny high-tech microphone and a body camera, a gift from Leo. He arrived at the headquarters alone, walking into the same sterile lobby from before. This time there were no pleasantries. Sterling and 2 other men were waiting in a conference room. The atmosphere was cold, and the air was thick with tension. "Mr. West," Sterling said, his eyes hard. Instead of signing, he looked Sterling directly in the eye. "I'm not here for a check. I'm here for justice." Sterling's composure finally snapped. "You stubborn fool," he sneered, his voice dropping all pretense of civility. "Do you have any idea what we'll do to you? We'll make your father's accident look like a fender bender." Ethan stood up, his voice clear and resonant. "It's a little late for that. You already confessed to everything." He walked toward the door. Sterling's face turned from a sneer to pure rage, and he lunged for Ethan. "Give me that device. Give it to me." Ethan dodged him easily, slipping out the door. Sterling and his men were a step behind him. The chase was on, but it was already too late. Ethan was out of the building, and the meeting, once a trap for him, had turned into a trap for them. He had everything he needed, a full confession, and a clear admission of their intent to harm him. The hunt was over, and the prey was caught. Collided. Town. Ethan walked into the FBI field office in the nearest city, his heart a steady drumbeat in his chest. He was no longer a lone vigilante, but a crucial witness with irrefutable evidence. The 2 agents who met him, a sharp-eyed woman named Agent Hayes and her stoic partner, Agent Miller, listened to his story with a professional skepticism that slowly turned into genuine surprise. He handed them the hard drive containing the video from Bob's camera, the grainy footage of the men with the wire. He showed them the steel wire he had found and the piece of the Escalade's taillight. Then he played the recording from his meeting with Sterling and his cronies. The recording was a bombshell. It was a clear, unfiltered confession of bribery, conspiracy, and murder. The arrogance in Sterling's voice, the cold calculation of his words, it was all there. Agent Hayes's eyes widened as she listened. He just admitted to everything. "He was cornered," Ethan said, his voice quiet. "They thought they were setting a trap for me. Instead, they walked right into one of their own company. He had restored a community's faith in justice. He stood by the window of the FBI office, watching the news unfold on a television monitor. He saw Sterling's face on the screen, his power gone, his life ruined. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. And he had finally, truly, gotten it. The peace. The last few weeks were a blur. The media attention eventually faded, and the court proceedings began. With the video confession and the hard evidence Ethan had provided, the case was open and shut. Mr. Sterling and his accomplices were convicted and sentenced to long prison terms. Blackstone, facing a mountain of lawsuits and public outrage, filed for bankruptcy, their empire of greed collapsing as quickly as it had been built. Ethan stayed in town. He could have sold the farm and used the settlement money to start a new life anywhere he wanted, but he chose to stay. The land, once a source of conflict and tragedy, was now a symbol of his family's resilience. He started a new project, not a massive, profitable venture, but a quiet, heartfelt one. He used some of the money to clear and refurbish his father's old barn. He turned it into a community center, a place for local farmers to meet, share ideas, and sell their produce directly. He called it the West Barn, a simple nod to his father's legacy. He also started a small foundation in his father's name, dedicated to helping local farmers fight off corporate land grabs. He was no longer a soldier or a vigilante. He was a caretaker, a protector of a way of life that had almost been lost. He would spend his days working the land the same way his father had, but with a new sense of purpose. He wasn't just working the soil, he was tending to the soul of his town. One afternoon, a young girl from a nearby farm, no older than 10, came to visit. She brought him a drawing of the West Barn. "My dad says you saved our farm," she said, her voice filled with a child's pure admiration. Ethan smiled, a true, genuine smile that reached his eyes for the first time in a long time.